It's here. It's now. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. We are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Jessica Hershfield. Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for your podcasting. But now why we're here today, because this is really going to be a fascinating conversation with Jessica. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Jessica Hershfield is ventured into the crazy world of wine and then added that layer of craziness into canned wine. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how she got here. We're going to talk about what she's found interesting on the way there and what her ultimate goals are. Because I think they diverge from many people's idea of what this should be based on what I've read and heard. So welcome to the show. This is great.
Thanks for having me.
What are you doing today anyway? What are you just cruising around, showing up on podcasts? You trying to sell something? What?
Always be selling, right?
That's right. Always be closing. The ABCs of wine.
Yep.
I found it. I was reading your background, and I want to touch on it just a little bit because it's really important to when you venture into entrepreneurial things, what your background is, how you got there. It has a lot to do with your success, metric. But you went to Stanford. Obviously a wonderful university with the Ivy League of the West Coast, so to speak, average football team, but that's okay. So you can see you can't see it from here. There's a USC Trojan football. But you went into corporate America, and here you are doing an entrepreneurial thing, but why did you go to corporate America, and now why are you here? Well, don't answer that part yet. Just how'd you get to corporate America?
Corporate America was the end goal. I think growing up, it was always expected that I would achieve. And, I had the understanding that I was, going to go to the best school that I possibly could. And I got into Stanford, and Stanford was an amazing experience for me. I learned a lot. I grew a lot. It's a wonderful university and experience all around. And the next step from there was, what's the best job you can get? And corporate America was that for me. I ended up going to Google, which was in the Bay Area, the be all end all. And I think for me, as a first job out of college, I think if you knew that you could get Google and get that on your resume, then you can basically go anywhere from there.
It's true. Were your parents in corporate America?
A little bit. My dad was in private equity growing up, and then he actually started his own private equity firm. So that's where I get some of the entrepreneurship side from as well. My mom is in nonprofit, so she started a nonprofit for it's called Computers to Kids. They give computers to families,
that's great.
Yeah, who can't afford them.
Because you're looking at the picture of my dad, we were talking about it, and he was an entrepreneur all his life. He came to America in 1949, blah blah blah. And so I always thought that that's what I was going to do. But when I was at USC, I went to Career Day, and I signed up for one of the largest corporations at the time at Xerox, and I used to look around and go, I didn't want to do this, but I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And you're right. When you put a Google or Xerox or an IBM at that time on your resume, you had carte blanche if you wanted to have carte blanche.
Yeah.
What did you learn there? What did you find about corporate America that taught you lessons for today's environment?
Yeah, it was interesting because when I went to Google, I worked on Google Glass, which was...
Well, that was successful.
Yeah. Which, in and of itself was a really interesting experience within Google because it was a little bit more of the entrepreneurship side of Google. It wasn't selling ads. It wasn't doing their keyword search. And so I kind of got a little bit of a touch of what it looks like to be growing a business or trying to grow a business with obviously a massive budget behind you. So
yeah, right.
A little bit different.
Kind of easy.
But so I got to learn kind of structure and how to manage a massive team there. But very quickly, I felt like I was this teeny tiny cog in this massive wheel that I wasn't making any impact. So my next role, I went to Uber, and when I joined Uber, it was 2014, so it was still a pretty nascent new company. And that's where I really think I got my startup experience and what it means to, put goals down, grow 1,000,000 miles a second, have these ambitious goals. And having that experience, I think, is really important to where it led to me being an entrepreneur today.
The French counterpart Uber.
Yes. I started in Asia actually with
Oh,
Uber.
really?
Hmm
Is there an Asian term for Uber?
I don't know the accent for Uber. I don't
I got
know. Yeah, I started in Singapore, so it was really
Wow, that's
interesting.
really cool.
Hmm
That's cool. So international travel, international business is so important
Yeah.
for background. I think it's really important for winemakers to travel the world and make wine throughout the world. But you said something earlier about your father being in private equity, and here you are. And I listened to a podcast that you did, and you talk about, I'm not sure what the end game is, but I'm just enjoying my journey right now. And I thought that's so different because I had another woman in here. She's doing something similar in that she's using glass for 375 single serve portions of quote unquote premium wines. We'll define that in a minute. But her whole objective is to build the brand and get off the rolls.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like that's necessarily what your thought process was.
I think they can come hand in hand,
Yeah.
right?
If somebody makes me a lucrative offer,
Yeah, exactly. I
yeah.
mean, we have very ambitious goals for Just Enough, and that would then come with the lucrative payout, hopefully at the end. But I think what's really important is that we spend so much of our life working. It's what we do for most of the hours of our day, that I wanted to find something that I really enjoyed and that I
Mhm.
really love doing every single day. And I had that itch to be an entrepreneur and just have my own thing and move away from corporate world and stop building for someone else and build for myself, which
Yeah.
is part of the passion. But then going into an industry that I love, right? And enjoy, as much as I think Uber changed the world, and and then I got to I worked at Lime for a little bit. So I got into this kind of technology niche. While I think it's super important, it's not what I love. Like, I don't love moving people. I don't find it fascinating. I don't find it that interesting. And so doing something that you really enjoy every day is so important because you're doing it for the rest of your life for so many hours of your day.
We were doing Lime scooters in Armenia.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, they're great. It's
I was the old guy with the gray hair going down
they're super fun, right? But it's not my thing. So
In fact, my sound engineer today, my son-in-law and I were competing about who could get the thing working
it's
first.
fast enough.
So,
Who could go over the
but
bump?
people always say that to me. Wow, what a great opportunity! What a great business you're in. The wine industry is sort of like the airline industry, where there's a great number of benefits to it. But man, it's a tough racket. It's a tough road to hoe. You said it earlier. How do you want to make $1 million in the wine business? Start with 10 million.
hmm
And I used to taste only on Tuesdays, and people say, "What a great business!" Like, yeah, Tuesday's a pretty good day,
Yeah.
but the rest of it's business. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a sort of the two personalities of the wine world, where we get to, and I'll put it another way, where a winemaker said, "I meet amazing people, I drink amazing wines, I go to amazing places, I eat amazing food."
hmm
So if I don't make so much money right now, we're doing all right.
Yeah.
Because that's the pursuit of what you want to do.
Yeah.
But you weren't always that interested in wine. You learned it somewhere else. You didn't even learn it here.
I didn't. I first got my first touch of really experiencing wine and enjoying it for what it is when uh during my time at Stanford, I actually took a quarter off, and instead of going abroad and studying, I went abroad and did cooking school in Italy
And
for
partied. Yeah, okay,
yeah.
great.
Yeah, basically. I kind of had this mindset of like, and maybe I was too business focused at the time, but I instead of wanting to take a year off and travel post college, I decided to do it during college and have my 4 month kind of foray into
Great.
to
If you can do
European
it.
adventures, right? And there's something about this like European, especially Italian experience where you sit down and you eat meals and they're 4 hours long and they're paired with food and you pair it with wine. And that experience to me is something that I really love doing and I really enjoy. And then I think I kind of moved away from that when I got back into corporate world and really, working incredibly hard. And then for me, that like reward of sitting down at the end of a day, work day on a Thursday night or whatever it is, and having that glass of wine is it's such a joy for me. And that's where I really got to love
Is it a
wine.
daily part of your life right now? Not the business of wine, but having wine.
Most days.
I mean,
For most days for me, it's that transition from, okay, time to close the computer and have a glass of wine.
it comes to the point where it's, what am I going to drink tonight? What do I feel like drinking? Do I feel like one of my just enough wines, or do I feel like something else that we don't have in the can? And then what am I going to eat?
Yeah.
Because it becomes the priority of the profile of what you feel and how you've been. And I think wine is supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's supposed to take you somewhere else. It's supposed to make you feel like you're somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not somewhere else at that time, like you said, Italy, um, you have the memory of that place
Mm-hmm.
when you taste the proper wine.
Mm-hmm.
And this leads to this packaging idea you have, and we're going to get into the thick of this. Um, canned wines aren't new. They've been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Plastic bottles have been around a long, long time,
Mm-hmm.
actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think Pat Ronay of Vintage Wine Estates told me he had a can of wine from like the early 1900s that he still has.
Wow.
Probably not very good at this
I
point.
wouldn't open that. No.
But I was mentioning somewhere around here, there's an empty box of 100 cans. As I started tasting through, I could not find early on appelated or vintage cans.
Mm-hmm.
What has evolved? Why has this evolved? Why do you have this? Why did you think this was a good idea?
When I first started this company, the purpose of the can for me was I was tired of opening a bottle of wine and wasting it a few days later because it would go bad or
And,
drinking too much.
there's no solution to that. Just finish it.
Well, then, and especially during COVID, I would do that and the bottle's open, might as well finish it, right? And then I would feel bad the next morning or slower the next morning. So I wanted this idea of built-in portion control, right? This is my can for the night. This is what I'm going to have. So for me, that single serving was what I wanted to do. And that's where I evolved into the can for that purpose. The can gives you a whole lot of other added benefits, and we can go into this with more of the packaging discussion, but more environmentally friendly. You can take it where you don't want to take glass, portable, all of that. And then when I was really looking into what I wanted to do in 2020, and still true to this day, is most of the canned wine tends to be a lower quality wine. So I couldn't find a one that I really, really enjoyed the experience out of and drinking it. And so I wanted to distinguish ourselves away from some of the other canned wines because there are competitors out there. There are doing it.
Tons.
There are a lot. I think the category of the lower price, kind of like $3 to $4 on the shelf can, is pretty saturated.
Mm-hmm.
There's opportunity for that premium can to be become known as a category leader. And that's where we want to come in and fit, is be the really nice experience out of the can.
Because I would say, I think I mentioned 5 years ago, I started this summer thing. I should show you the package. It came out really cool.
Yeah.
But I had to look for stuff I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not find first a line of cans
Mm-hmm.
that were all appellated or all vintaged.
Mm-hmm.
And then once there was that I liked them all.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up choosing 5 different cans, 5 different sizes,
Mm-hmm.
200, 250, a 375, a 500.
Wow.
So I must have actually duplicated one and then put them out there. And we sold a lot of them. There were
Yeah.
a lot of people were interested in having them around. It seemed like the 200 was too small. It seemed like the 500 was too big. For the listeners, a bottle of wine is $7.50, so a 250 can would be 1/3 of a bottle. And a typical bottle pours 5 glasses,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 6 at a cheap restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so excuse me, so
Typical
you're actually
5-ounce pour.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're pouring about a glass and a half in
Yep.
general, right?
Exactly.
And so this is not easy to do. And forget the idea of bringing a product to market, any product. Like I
Yeah.
told you about my niece doing some salad dressing. But this is alcohol.
Yeah.
And so you're sitting around the kitchen table thinking, I need a smaller glass of wine and I'm going to start this business. What was it about the alcohol business that you went, oh my gosh, this is not what I expected?
What was it about I mean, to your point, the compliance part of this business is tough. But I think what surprised me the most about the alcohol business is, and you hear about this a lot, but for me, what was the most challenging part is how slow it is and how antiquated
Right.
it is. Everything moves so slowly, and coming from the tech world where everything needed to be done yesterday all the time, having to really learn patience to start this company,
Yeah, right.
and with everything, winemakers and wine buyers and all that kind of stuff, it's slow. Even the compliance part of it is, you'll get your license in 6 months. It's
Right. It's hard.
it's really slow. So that was the hardest thing for me to learn, is just to be patient and move away from that tech mindset that everything was going to be done yesterday.
Well, you
That's been a
can't sit in front of
challenge.
a keyboard and change your direction you're doing.
Right.
And I contend this one. It's a once a year business, right? It's only, every vintage is different.
Yeah.
You only get one chance a year to make it right,
Yeah.
and so that just slows things down. Besides the compliance, in fact, I still have my 7 licenses here as we sit,
Mm-hmm.
and I have people coming in that want to buy them. But then they go online, and my price is a little high,
Mhm.
but it includes the 2 years at least it's gonna take to get them,
Mhm.
and the lost profit to do that,
Mhm.
including not the least of which is a manufacturing license. We can make wine, and those are hard to get and put together in one place.
They are.
So everybody goes online. They go, "Oh yeah, it's only $25 for whatever, 2,500 for a retail license and 6,000 for a manufacturer." Yeah, but you got to find a place. You got to go through city council. You got to do all this stuff to get it. So, so you came up with these ideas. The premium. Did you look at the market first and say, "Look, yeah, we don't need all this stuff here, and what's missing?" Like, did you do that chart where
Yeah, we did a lot of analysis in the beginning. I very early on I was considering doing Tetra Pak as like
really,
the
yeah,
first packaging, and Tetra Pak
which
is
for folks is like a milk carton.
it's like what you get your coconut water in
Yeah,
kind of
right.
thing. And very quickly realized that that wasn't going to be a viable option. And one is because I think I was concerned that there was this perception of cans and that cans are bad.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to do the Tetra Pak because you could close it, and maybe that would move away from the aluminum perception of cans. And very quickly realized for two reasons that that wasn't viable. One is that there's two companies in the world that make the packaging of Tetra Pak, and their minimum orders were just way out of what we
Right.
could do for a test. But two, it's actually less environmentally friendly than the can, because you have to, in order to recycle it, you have to remove the plastic pouch from
Oh,
the
really?
cardboard,
I didn't
which
know that.
no one's going to do.
No, right.
So it ends up being less environmentally friendly. So quickly moved into cans, and then we were looking there. There's actually, from a compliance standpoint, there's few wine sizes that you can legally sell in single packaging. It's 187, 250, 375, 500. So we were then deciding what was going to be the most viable option for us. Most of the cans out there, and even the availability of cans, is 250 and 375
Right.
milliliters. All of the research out there and all the surveys said that 250 was even though most of the cans in that at that time were 375, 250 was an option that people wanted more of.
Hmm.
And it fit more in the lifestyle of, consuming half a bottle of wine in one sitting is a lot at one time for some
I guess a
people.
matter of perspective on this point, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Especially when, you drink out a can, you drink faster, so people don't really realize that they're drinking half a bottle of wine that quickly. So they wanted 250. So we knew we wanted to do 250. And then we did a lot of research into what was out there, and found that, as I said, I think that kind of lower price tier, that mid price tier of cans was pretty saturated,
Yeah.
but not in the premium side.
So you decided on the cans. You decided on the size, which is a good size, I think. Um, Now you got to find some juice, and you're not going to make it. I always thought the biggest error that guy made on Shark Tanks that had that glass, the pre-poured glass,
Mm-hmm.
was that he didn't just sell the license to Kendall Jackson or Gallo or somebody
Mm-hmm.
and get out of it. Because why do you want to go source wine, and why do you want to go through the headache and then the lack of consistency and have to find it next day? The guy pulls the plug. I mean, all those things come into play.
Yeah.
How did you find their source?
So a couple of things fell into place really early, which was great. We have a winemaker. He's like a very, very close family friend. He's known me since I was an infant. Our moms grew up. His name is
Wow.
Ross Bentley. He came from 100 Acre, and so obviously he had the really like winemaking experience side. So he became our winemaker really early on, which was great. And then I got connected to a wine conglomerate, and they have kind of been my mentors throughout this. And they were the ones who gave us our first juice and really like
Wow.
put it into the
Do they have a
cans.
canning line there? Because that was another,
No
that's
canning
still a
line.
hurdle.
Yep. So we source all of our wine in bulk, and that's a whole, the whole industry is really interesting. We buy wine from individual wineries. We now have contracts with a lot of wineries, so for the future we can guarantee gallons, which is important. And then we have a whole separate packaging, canning product line
Did
as
you
well.
expect that when you looked for sourcing? Like, wait a minute. I mean, like 95% of wine is sourced, and almost 5% of it's estate bottled and grown. Was that a surprise to you?
I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no idea there were wine brokers who
Yeah.
just
Oh,
sell
yeah.
grapes and juice and
Bottom fishers and some
Yeah.
reputable people.
yeah.
And,
It's a whole nother part of the industry I had no idea was a
wow.
thing.
So, like, you making phone calls? What are you doing? Like, trying to figure this out and go, well, I'm not sure I understand what's going on here.
the first 4 or 5 months was a lot of just information
Wow.
gathering. And that's, I will say the benefit of choosing an industry like the wine industry is that it is an industry of people who want to talk to people,
Right.
right? They want to sit down and have a glass of wine with you. So I was fortunate that in that people would be willing to have a conversation with me and just share their knowledge and insight and help me understand something I knew
Isn't
nothing
that
about.
isn't that fun though?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't wine just this glue,
Mm-hmm.
this X factor that no matter what, it always seems to be, you probably go through this now that you're in the industry, that the conversation always comes back to wine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a threatening conversation.
Mm-hmm.
People want to know.
Yeah.
And they want to know about what you're doing because you're in a different part of the world as far as packaging, et cetera. But conceptually and just from a knowledge standpoint, people ask questions they're not threatening questions.
Yeah.
I get embarrassed sometimes because sometimes a whole dinner conversation with friends will come back to just wine.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for my friends who do other things that don't get to talk about it.
Well, it's relatable. Everyone likes a glass of wine, right? So it's relatable.
Well, there's the group that doesn't understand it and wants to know more.
Yeah.
And then there's a group that does understand it, and now you're doing something very unique. Uh, s- so what we call ready to serve, right? RTS
Yep.
market is hot. It's in both cocktails and in wine. I'm trying to in my own mind. This is a real question about the segmentation of the consumer into this group. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is there an age group that is referring? Like you said, your father is proud of you for doing this, but he's not necessarily he wasn't a can drinker before you
Mm-hmm.
started into it.
Yeah.
Um, what group is this? What's the demographic? What's the target?
For us, it's the older millennials. So it's
Oh my
the
God, there's older millennials already?
I'm an older millennial. It's
Jeez,
crazy to me how
we're
actually
in big
vast
trouble.
the millennial age group is.
Mhm.
Yeah, so our target tends to be older millennials who are intrigued by different packaging, who, I think we're in the wine world in general, there is this risk that the older generation of people who consume most of the bottles of wine are not being replaced by
That's true.
the millennials or the next generations. So for us, the target demographic is that, 28 to 38-year-old kind of older millennial who, and for us, it's people who want to spend, are not willing, are willing to spend $100 on a nice bottle of wine when they go out to dinner on a Friday night, but want a really nice glass on a Tuesday night or
Hmm.
when they go to the park or
Hmm.
anything like that. So that tends to be our kind of demographic.
So this is the part that not confuses me. Maybe it's makes me ponder because I have this philosophical, romantic idea of what goes in a glass of wine,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a story. Like I said, it should take you a place. And now you've appellated your wines, you've vintaged them, so that thought process should do that. You
Mm-hmm.
should feel something. You should feel the terroir. You should understand where you're going. You have a lot of Central Coast wines here. Versus, and now what we're trying to attract a generation, and we're using packaging to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think all generations eventually, only because it's been around for thousands of years, end up with this idea there's something valuable to a good glass of wine,
Mm-hmm.
period.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're using the marketing side of the packaging side, which is a part I'm going to say frustrates me when I go to the market
Mm-hmm.
to do that, which is fine. That's the marketing. That's what business is about. I'm still this romantic person about it. I want to know what's in that glass of wine
Yeah.
and where it's taking me.
Yeah.
And the millennials aren't understood well when it comes to alcohol consumption. What are you finding? Are you finding traction with them?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we launched in September of 2020, and it's been a whirlwind and a
Yeah,
crazy experience ever since. And we're still, to your point, I think it's somewhat difficult sometimes to really know who your true customer
it's
is,
really hard.
especially when 90% of our business is wholesale.
Yes,
So it's really hard
you
to figure
can't
out
tell.
who it is. But from what we can gather, we are starting to get some really good traction, and the cans in general are starting to get some really good traction with the millennial market. I think for us, what we really tried to target, and you kind of talk about this a little bit of this romantic idea of wine. I think you can teeter, and there's this fine line of being romantic, of being like unapproachable. and this, like, if you have the Somm curated wine experience, that I think a lot of millennials turn away from that because they
Right.
don't understand it. So we're trying to make our packaging, our branding, the varietals we choose very approachable
Hmm.
so that you still get that, wonderful experience of having a glass of wine at night, but that you're not overwhelmed by by even approaching the wine
Right.
world.
That's a really good point, actually. I think that the aristocracy of wine is propagated by the industry itself. That, and I have this TV show I'm working on, which departs from all swirling and sniffing
Mm-hmm.
because that's the part that people go,
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
smell blackberries in this wine, so I must be stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Or, but like on the show, when you asked if I wanted to open the wines, I don't because I don't want to talk about wines I'm tasting on the show because people have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They can't reference it. Even if they're watching on TV, they can't experience what I'm experiencing. So I think that the industry itself propagates the distance between the consumer and what's actually in the glass.
Yep.
And I want to tell the story. So I think it's a good point. It's a really, really good point.
Well, and I think you could kind of get away with that with older generations because you didn't have it in your face every day with social media
That's true.
and being touched everywhere you go, right? So you could have the experience at the winery and be kind of removed from it and then kind of have that magic of what it is behind the scenes, whereas now you have it everywhere, right?
The what we talked about a little bit. What was hard for me at the end of this company, and we loved doing it. I mean, I'm like you. I loved the challenge of coming in here
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out what was next on the agenda to market my products. But you are competing socially, and you said you're one of the few direct to consumer, or DTC as we call it, canned companies. And you've got a weight issue here. You've got a size. I noticed that this was self shipping, which is
Mm-hmm.
great. That's a
Mm-hmm.
great idea.
Yeah.
I guess you don't have the problem with bottles. So, I mean, after all, a bottle of wine is about 3 pounds, and a plastic bottle of wine is about a pound. And here it's probably the same. How much does this weigh?
That's about it's about 3 pounds. So
Okay, so
yeah.
there's more than a bottle of wine in there.
That's 2
Um,
bottles. Actually, it's
yeah,
exactly 2 bottles.
yeah. So that's actually great economics.
Yeah.
Because that's the other problem with the DTC world is that shipping isn't going down; it's going higher. So
Much higher.
the pain they're in. But let's just go back there. You said about 10% of your business is direct to consumer, and you're one of the few left doing it. Um, and I listened to one of the podcasts you're on, and I wanted to delve deeper into one of the things you were talking about, which is you're looking for demographics. You're trying to find people on the web, and you're not only competing against everybody else who's doing the same thing you are,
Mm-hmm.
all the other canned people, and all the other bottled wine people, and all the other ready to serve cocktails,
Mm-hmm.
but you're competing against Kim Kardashian because
Mm-hmm.
there's only so much airtime that you're going to get on a social platform.
Yeah.
And but then you have to, if you don't do it, right, then you're like, well, I must be missing something, right?
Yeah.
So what's your general thought process? A lot of organic,
Yep.
Facebook,
Yep.
Instagram, TikTok yet?
A little bit of TikTok.
Love to see it.
Not on Threads yet.
No, okay. And then paid?
No paid.
Really?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. We're still kind of navigating how we deal with this from a marketing standpoint, but you were seeing, and you mentioned this a little bit, but a lot of alcohol brands, especially recently, are completely moving away from direct to consumer. They maybe started direct to consumer and they're not, you're talking about June Shine and Bev, House Aperitif, which is this it was this darling of the direct to consumer alcohol business that
Yeah.
went bankrupt this past year, right? And I think for us, it's really important.
Which brand was that?
House, Haus. They're a aperitif brand.
Huh, I don't know that.
We think you kind of have these brands that are really, really focused on direct to consumer, and that was their bread and butter. And then you have brands that are only focused on wholesale. We want to be towards more of the wholesale side, but still have a direct to consumer presence because it's a brand touch point, right? And I love this stat that I think it takes 7 times for a customer to see your brand before they purchase it.
Right.
Whether that's on organic
Yes.
social, whether it's they see on the
Horse hockey,
shelves,
whatever
it is. And so while we don't spend money, because I think that it's a really inefficient way to spend money, I think is with social media, because to your point, we're not going to be able to compete with the big brands that have millions
Right.
of dollars of social media budget. we don't. And so it's not an efficient, return on investment for us to spend money on social media. So we still have organic social. We do a little bit of micro influencer work just to get our brand out there some more, but we do nothing paid on social because it's just not how we are going to get a return on our investment.
It's very interesting because when we stopped, we were doing we've done everything. Um, and we were finding that the ROAS, for the consumers, listeners, it's return on ad spend. So if you spend $1, how much do you get back? Whether it's Google Analytics or Google, or whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, doesn't matter. So I spend $1. Let's just say for the consumer listening, that you need $4 to get it, just to even think about making any money.
Mm-hmm.
So if I spend $1 on Facebook ads, I need to get $4 in sales,
Mm-hmm.
and we weren't even close
Mm-hmm.
on a Facebook ad, because when those ads are presented on Facebook to the broad market, and you can't define on a very granular basis, you can't define who gets the message. It was like less than $1, so I was losing money for sure. However, when you retargeted people that knew who we were on Facebook, the ROAS was like 7.
Yep.
So I was giving $7. So the blended thing was like satisfactory.
Mm-hmm.
But what I determined at the end was that social media is a necessary thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
because it is today's touch point.
Mm-hmm.
Though there's more mail being sent, and there's, don't even try TV ads. That's a waste of money.
Yeah.
But we're paying for this top level now awareness part of the funnel that we have no idea
Yeah.
what the value is.
Yeah.
But we got to pay you're paying. I mean, forget even organic. You're paying somebody to create these posts, right?
True.
It's not free.
True. It's
right?
not free.
So you venture into the wholesale side,
Mm-hmm.
and you end up with like the largest group ever in the industry.
Yeah. Yes.
So, which is both a blessing, because you've got all these boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And you were able to get their attention, which is not easy to do.
Yeah.
At the same time, then you're competing against that whole thick book of what's going on. So how's that experience?
It's new. It's a challenge.
How long have you been there?
So we launched with Southern Glazers in early Q2 of this year. So it's been about 3 months.
Oh, okay. So you're just in
So
its
it's still
infancy.
very, very new. And it's funny. This is the power of, I guess, in-person networking. I got to the Southern's attention because I was doing a little pop-up in the marina in San Francisco, and we were doing some wine tasting at a store, and a news anchor for a local TV news station stopped by and started
Wow.
talking to me, and he was like, "What are you guys doing?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm the local news on KTVU News. Like, do you want to come on the show tomorrow?" And I was like, "Sure, I guess so." And on that 4-minute segment, the vice president of Southern saw it in California, and he reached
Wow.
out of the blue.
That's like
and said,
Hollywood.
"Do you have
Huh?
distribution?"
Schwab's Pharmacies.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So that's how we got in. That's how we got their attention. So it's just, I always think that the power of just saying yes to some in-person networking is
for
so
sure.
important. And getting your face and brand out there is sometimes more important than the behind the scenes work.
Let's go back to why you were even doing a pop-up. This is not, again, this is organic, boots on the ground marketing.
Mm-hmm.
You approached the local market and said, "Hey, I want to pour some wine." And of course, that's not easy to do because there's permitting requirements for all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you're just pouring off what do they allow?
Little tiny tasters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why'd you choose this market?
So I was at the time I'm based in San Francisco,
Yeah.
and we had, we were starting to get some good traction with some independent markets throughout that area. And so, I think, especially with the cans, it's becoming a much larger percentage of the wine world. But it's still new, and still some people haven't tried a wine out of the can yet, or they look at it and they're like, "Oh, that's going to be a bad thing." So I think just like having, lips to can and really tasting what
Yeah,
it
right.
is really, really important.
That's amazing.
And so we, especially as a new brand, we started to do a lot of these, in-person tasting events just to get our brand out. Even, in a post-COVID world, right? Like we launched in COVID. So
Yeah, no, great.
just
Congratulations. That was brilliant.
yeah, exactly. So just to even get the brand out there, and just this guerrilla marketing in the very beginning is kind of how you have to do it from like a cost perspective too, and just really slowly get the name out there, and then more independents pick you up from there, and then it kind of
Oh, and a TV show might catch you, and then the guy from Southern executive might call you up and say,
you
"Come
never
on."
know.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's unbelievable. Really,
yeah,
that's unbelievable because there's
yeah.
probably hundreds of people bang on their door to try their product.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah. And the flip side, going back to your original question, is navigating the distribution network is really challenging, and
yes,
we
it is changing every day.
changing every day. And to your point, we now have the benefit of having this, massive kind of like, well, we like to call it like, this the silver-backed gorilla behind us now, who's
Right,
Southern.
right.
But for Southern, like who the reps, like we're this tiny brand that doesn't matter to them, right? Like we're so new, it doesn't, we're still trying to even get our brand out there. So it's, even though we signed Southern, and we know that they're really going to help us, especially get more traction with the larger chains and grow from there. It's still a lot of ourselves going out and selling, and
Oh, for sure.
we have to continue to do that.
For the listeners, there's this tiers of marketing, and we already mentioned the direct to consumer, which is she will package and ship it right to your home. But then when she's with the supplier like Southern, which is a huge company, she becomes what they call a supplier. Southern's the distributor. The supplier has time and energy invested in making sure that the distributor understands what this product is.
Yeah.
And eventually you're going to invite people to go to Hawaii. If they sell enough of your cans, you're going to send them to Hawaii
Yep.
and maybe buy them an espresso machine or something. I don't know. And so something
I'd
special
love
like
to
that.
have enough budget to be able to send
Yeah,
reps
right,
to Hawaii.
exactly.
That'd be great.
How different is this than alcohol popsicles?
Yeah.
Sorry, I skipped over this, and I want to go back to this because I've
Yeah.
had them. What
So
was that about?
I in between my time at Uber and Lime, I had, I've had this kind of entrepreneurship bug. I wanted to
course.
start a company for a long time. So I took a little bit of time off between Uber and Lime, and I kind of explored what I wanted to do. I don't think I was actually really ready to start a company at that point, because I dove into this idea, which was alcoholic push pops, basically. And I wanted them to be spirit based. I like dove into this. I dove
Alcohol doesn't
into
freeze, by the way. just
Oh,
so
I
you
know,
Oh,
I
okay,
know.
just wanna make sure.
I dove into the like recipe asset. I think I had more fun testing the recipes and going down that. And then quickly, I think I realized, after actually doing some work and some groundwork, what it would actually take to start this business, that the distribution, the compliance, was just like
Yeah, no, distilled
almost
spirits is harder.
impossible.
Yeah, right.
And so
That's really funny.
having had no experience in alcohol, I was like, this was
Well, you can't learn unless you
try.
screw
Yeah.
up. That's what it comes down to it. But I've had many, because of what we've done for all the years, I've had many people come through with alcoholic popsicles and
Yeah.
confections, and it's kind of like, I don't know, man. I don't get it, but whatever.
Yeah.
Um, one of the subjects that surrounds you that is a very important subject in today's environment, in industry generally, but wine for sure, is women in wine. And I've had some very interesting guests on this show, women of color that have had, resistance, not only for, race, but sex.
Mhm.
Did you feel any sexism when you started this project?
No, not directly. The only thing that you feel is that more often than not, the people you're dealing with are male.
Yeah. Well, it's a male-dominated industry, which is one of the complaints that you get from the other side, so to speak. And I've always tried to look at it, and I've been doing this. Like you see the picture from 1975. Was it a deliberate exclusion, or was it just the way it was, or was it lack of piercing this veil that was perceived to be there? I mean, I actually answer the question, but um, it's changed a lot.
Mhm.
Particularly on the manufacturing side of wine,
Mhm.
there's still sort of this barrier for executive management, and here you are, executive management,
Yeah.
the management,
Yeah.
the entire management.
Yeah. I have a co-founder who's
Oh,
also
okay,
female.
okay, yeah, nice.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah.
So, has it been a benefit then at some point?
Yeah, it's really interesting also, because when you think about women in wine on the business side of it, it's interesting because the vast majority of wine buyers are women.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's something like 70% of wine bought in wholesale is by women, not
I
by
didn't know
men.
that.
Um, so, and I think for us, it's In some ways it's a really interesting time to be a part of the industry
Hmm.
because I think, and it's not necessarily just in the wine world, but we're having a lot of conversations with larger chains who are really focused on and improving
Right.
the distribution of representing minorities and women as well. And so that to some degree has, I think, helped open some doors for us, which has been really great. And I think it'll help the shelf distribution have more representation as well.
I
Um,
think there's value. There's certainly money available
yeah.
to grow through that. As long as
Well,
you like my wife, almost gave my wife 1% more
yeah.
so we could say we're a female-owned company,
Yeah.
which I didn't. I should have done earlier, but now we don't have it anymore. But
Yeah. Well, fundraising a whole nother conversation.
that
It's
it's
an
that's
interesting time.
interesting because um, particularly in the people of color as well. When I've had many Psalms on the show and really interesting people, it wasn't that long ago when I reached out to the Black Vendors Association, and there were like 5 members. I'm talking
Mhm.
about 10 years ago, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
and now there's like 250 members.
Yeah.
And so those changes are good. I think it's important. I think, much like the wine itself, when the consumer gets resistant to it because it seems snobbery or there seems to be they can't approach that space because it's intimidating.
Yeah.
The industry should not be intimidating either.
Yeah.
Let everybody come through this headache that we go through. Let everybody go through.
Yeah.
You
Totally.
want to learn about this trial? Go ahead. It's great. This is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's important, and I congratulate on that because I think it's um, something that we want to propagate.
We'll
Um,
represent different as you said, wine is all about taste and you have to have different types of people who are making wine to have different taste of wine, right?
exactly.
And so,
Um, let's talk about tasting wine.
mhm.
When you were in Spain and you had this Tempranillo or whatever you're in Rioja, it could have been Garnacha. Um, what were you thinking? Did you say, I've never experienced this before? What is this taste I'm getting? Um, I want to taste it again, like that impulse when you taste a really good glass of wine and you kind of go, wait a minute, what was that?
Yeah.
And you do it again.
Yeah.
Is this what got you here?
Yeah, you know, I think that experience for like wine for me is an escape, right? It takes me back to the memory of when I had that Pinot or that Cab
Right.
or whatever it is, that Tempranillo that I was drinking. And so I think that like kind of epiphany for me is I wanted to sell something that I could physically give that experience to someone, right? I was tired of, even though I do a lot of keyboard worrying
Yeah, right.
now, like
Yeah,
I
well,
think I was tired of just sitting behind a keyboard all day every day and not actually seeing anything come to fruition in terms of a product that I could give to someone, right? And so for me, wine and that experience that I love, which is tasting that glass of wine and really, bringing it back to a memory that you might have or a vacation, like you're sitting on a terrace in, Paris or whatever it is, that is something that I wanted to achieve for people. And that's what I get when I
so
drink
when you
wine.
taste wines, we were talking about this a little bit off camera, and that's the subject of the quality of the wine, the complexity of the wine, in your case, appellated and vinted. What are you tasting for? What do you sit? I'm sure you sit with a winemaker, and when you're tasting, what are you thinking? This would work in a can?
Yeah, it's funny. The first question we go through when we get all of our samples, we go through a lot of give it a lot of bad wine, and
Yes,
then
there's a lot of that
there's a lot
around.
of that. But for me, the first question that myself and my winemaker and my team of we have a team who tastes with us now is, could I drink a can of this? Could I drink 2 cans of this? Could I drink 3 cans of this?
Yes,
Sitting and if
hence destroying the single serve
yeah,
idea.
yeah. We're not gonna judge. It might be a 1 can night, it might be a 3 can night, whatever you wanna do is up to you. Um, but that's the very, like, minimal question, like, could I
Yes,
sit there and imagine myself drinking a can of this? And then all of our wines have a very similar profile. They're dry, they're not sweet, they're more kind of old world style, and
hmm,
so we try to keep a very, consistent palate, throughout our wines.
sure,
We love the Central Coast. The wines are affordable. They taste great.
true.
It's up and coming. There's some really interesting winemaking practices. We all produce sustainably. So, just making sure we have a consistent profile, but at a basis, it's like, can I enjoy a whole can of this?
I would taste 65 to 75 wines every Tuesday, start at 9 and at 2. And you stumble across some really interesting things. And like you said, there's a lot of crap. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we would only approve around 15%,
Yeah.
as Dane knows how difficult it was to get here. But it's going to taste a lot of wine. And as you now know, there's tons on the market,
Yeah.
gallons and gallons and
Uh-huh.
gallons. And what's interesting to me and for the consumers to understand, the listeners, is that the stuff that you reject ends up somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it takes somebody like you and your winemaker to sort through the field and find something. And then you find something really cool. But you're right. I may not be able to drink a whole can of this.
Yeah.
Or it might be a little bit too complex and too off the wall for the general consumer who we're trying to attract in this can.
Mm-hmm.
That happen?
Yeah. I mean, you'll notice that we very proactively chose varietals that people know.
Yeah.
We have a Pinot, we have a Cab, we have a Chardonnay. Like, we have 6 core varietals. We're not putting, which might be interesting, we're not putting like an Albarino or,
Yeah.
like some
I've had Gruner
obscure,
Veltliner and things like that. And
right, some obscure grape that people don't know, because back to one of my original points is we want this to be really approachable. We want people to, like, when they pick up this can, they know it's going to be a really high quality glass of Pinot, right? And so while it might be fun to put something really interesting and
yeah,
unique
right.
into the can, we're also trying to make money and sell wine, so we want to make it really approachable. So that's why we chose like really core varietals.
Somebody gave me a project last year. It was hilarious for me. But it cost them a fortune for me to fix it for them. But they had brought in 100 ml test tubes of Chateau Angelus. I mean, right? A Grand Cru Saint-Emilion in 100 ml with a silk screen thing. I mean, it must cost a fortune
Mm-hmm.
to put this stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the wine itself is extraordinarily expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And in a complete failure, this bank had done it. They were going to do this virtual tasting, and they couldn't get the wine here on time because, of course, the packaging was complicated and blah blah blah. And it cost them a lot of money just to fix the problem. They
Yeah.
end up getting these things in these people's hands. I thought, hey, I'm wondering, and the question leads to like, I wonder if the next step of this is. Here you are with the sort of the premium version of what's on the shelf today,
Mm-hmm.
and now, are we going to get into Bordeaux? Maybe some some Grand Crus. Do you think somebody in some appellation like that would even let you, can it? Have you even thought about this? Like, what's the next step for you?
Well, yeah, the next step I think those are kind of two different questions. For the company itself, we're really primarily, we're a 2.5-year-old company. We're still very young. We're in wholesale in only a couple of states. Like, we really want to be national. That's the real next step for us,
Yeah.
is to go national with our offerings. Would it be fun to put some Grand
I'm just
Cru,
wondering if that's
like,
the progression of the packaging. Like,
yeah.
if it's that.
No, I think it could be interesting potentially one day to do like, a Washington Pacific, wine
Yes,
for Washington, or, do something maybe in Texas. They have their own up and coming wine region, do something
that's
like
true.
that. It's funny, I was in Bordeaux last August and was talking to some winemakers about what I'm doing, and they kind of laugh at you like,
Oh yeah, they're
the
not
can,
gonna.
really?
What were you doing there?
I was just on vacation. I'd never been, so I wanted to
That's
try
so cool.
the
Yeah.
wine region there myself. But I think it's gonna take a little bit of time for cans to be accepted in.
It won't happen.
It'll happen.
They can't even get them to be organic.
Yeah, I
I
think
mean,
it'll
some of
happen.
Bordeaux is organic, but
I think it'll happen. I think you'll never move away, and I don't think you should move away from the history of some of the wine houses in France, because that is such a special experience. But for some of the general winemaking practices out there, I think it'll happen at some point.
what have you? Has it piqued your interest in not the industry, but the history of wine? That you've started this project, you're going, wow, this is a complicated project. You're sort of in the contemporary part of it. You're part of the business of it, which, like we've talked about, is different than that what's in the glass sort of appreciation. But has it piqued an interest in the history of wine and what, you went to Bordeaux, you saw some amazing places, and that's had its own history, the monks in the 12th century kind of thing. Is that,
Yeah, we we made our first for licensing purposes in the first year, we actually made from grape to can, like our first
Really?
wines. And the experience of like doing, receiving the grapes from the fields and doing punch downs and all of the chemical stuff that goes into actually making wine
Right.
was fascinating to me to see like how much of a process this is and
Right.
actually experience it. And so that really piqued my interest into like, at the end of the day, we're farming, right?
Right.
We're like really making grapes, and how does this happen? And the
Yeah, you're
whole
farmers.
we're
That's
farmers,
what you end up learning about the wine business, that you really is farming.
totally.
Right.
And how to do that, cost effectively, but also sustainably, and like it's
Why did you decide to start with? Did you think that's what you needed to do, was start with picking grapes and fermenting it?
no,
'Cause it's way more expensive,
it's
right?
way more expensive. This goes back to the compliance part of it. Like, in order for you to get the license that we wanted to get, you have
Yes.
to
You have to ferment
you have to
something.
ferment something,
There's
or do
ways to do
wine. Now
that.
you do winemaking practices. The
Now that I own the
ABC.
company more, there's ways to do that without
Yeah,
having to do
so
it.
that was our way of doing it for the first year. We've now since not done that. Learnings. But I'm glad we did, because it gave us appreciation for that. But then through that, you really appreciate like the wine, like the farmers in the field who are doing that, and then it
Right.
kind of, you want to see how they do that in different parts of the world, and then you get into the history and the culture. I also think that in order for you to really kind of know, and like, you have to taste the wine for you to really recognize this is a Bordeaux, this is a, whatever it is. And so being into those regions and really learning about that, tasting it and experiencing it is how I remember it. And so that's
That's
piqued
what
my
it takes.
interest.
I
Yeah.
think for listeners, the only way to understand, and you can learn as much as you want. You don't have to be an expert on wine. You can just understand what you appreciate.
Yeah.
You can just decide you just like this brand and drink that brand. It's great.
Yeah.
But if you want to learn more, there's tons to learn. And the reason I brought that up is I did the same thing. I crushed a bunch of grapes, and it was, it cost me $22 a bottle to make it, and I could only sell it for 15 because I wasn't going to compete with Duckhorn at $35. I mean,
Right.
at the time, it just
Right.
wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And I don't think the consumer understands that as much. And you also found the value of being a negociant. Basically, you're a negociant now, and a negociant in its traditional thing was able to pick and choose the best stuff they could find and pass on the rest. And there's nothing wrong with that model. It's a great model. It's a very historical, ancient model to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, most of Bordeaux and Burgundy were negociants
Yeah.
most of their career. But I had an intern here who's now at enology school at Cornell. And because of her listening to conversations like yours and other females in the business, she piqued an interest and decided to get into enology. And her parents have a little vineyard in the valley here. And they did the same thing. They went and picked the grapes, and then they fermented it, and they got $20 in the bottle in it. And there's no way they're going to get $20 a bottle for the wine. When I showed her what I could buy for much, much, much less money, and so when she told me she got accepted into Cornell, I said, "Look, after you go through your class, would you just tell your parents there's a better way to do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
A smarter way to do this."
Yeah.
The reason I brought that up too was in our meeting, you listened to the podcast with Miriam, who's you said was a very bright entrepreneur. But one of the wineries in Armenia, one of the brightest things that ever came out of the conversation I had with this Juliana, which is Kadas wine in the Ararat Valley, was they had Michel Roland come and look at the vineyards and decide what they were going to do. And this is many years ago. He says, yes, suitable here. He had to say that because it's been 6,000 years. But he goes, now we need 100 years to figure it out.
Okay.
And she's like, yeah, but I'm 30 years old. I don't have 100 years.
Yeah.
But that to me speaks of the steward of the land. And what you were talking about earlier is we're all farmers in this industry. Eventually you're a farmer. It's about cultivating what that ground is going to give you.
Yeah.
And then the packaging notwithstanding, presenting that glass. I commend you on that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and one of the things
Keep that up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's to the like winemaking part of it too. It's people say that all winemakers can make wine when it's a really great year. It's good winemakers can make a wine when it's a really bad year. And so, you kind of underestimate the, and we get like when we're sourcing wine, we're all from the Central Coast. We really love the Central Coast wines for our taste profile. But you'll get 100 different Chardonnays from the Central Coast, and you're just amazed that it all comes from very similar terroir, right? Very similar soil and temperature and all that kind of stuff. How can they taste so differently, right? And it then comes to the winemaking practices. So it's really about how are you showcasing what the grapes are giving you, and then turning that into that glass that we really want to appreciate.
Is it artistry or is it science?
I think it's both.
Yeah. Well, you were a biology major.
I was,
So,
yeah. Yeah. It's I think I was amazed at how much science goes into the winemaking once you get the grapes. But then there's some feel to it, right? Like our winemaker will just kind of feel how it looks and taste and that kind of thing.
so my thought is, you said good winemakers can make good wine out of bad vintages, and a bad vintage for the consumer is not like it's horrible stuff. You can't drink it. It's just the nuances of farming, a late rainfall or whatever, or too much heat during picking. And so a good winemaker produces, for me, in my opinion, uh, the best example of what that vintage brings to the table.
Yeah.
And so that when somebody in the future says, yeah, this was a hot vintage, or this was a cold vintage, or this was an early vintage, whatever, it's expressing those things. It's not like what's the best glass of wine I can make. It's what's best expresses what was happening at the time,
Mm-hmm.
because it should be a sense of time and place.
Mm-hmm.
This is who we were, and this is what we were when it happened. And so I applaud you for doing this in the can. Like I said, packaging notwithstanding, your job is to present a great experience and expectation of what they're about to do. And if it's on the golf course, chugging a glass of wine, it's okay.
Who are we to judge?
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
This is a book written by a doctor in France in the 70s. He was an MD. He was also a homeopathic doctor. So the answers, I'm going to give you three answers, and I'll give you a human malady.
Okay.
So I'll pick one now.
Okay.
And I'll give you three. Since you've been to Bordeaux, I'm going to give you one of the answers could be a Bordeaux.
Okay.
And you can tell me what you think. Now, this is kind of like the answer. Actually, only a third of the people get it right because I only give them three choices.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So statistically, you're going to
got
be
a
whatever
30%
happens.
chance.
Right?
Yep.
But the more of it is, well, why did you choose that?
Sure.
And you get a variety of answers, kind of like the Master of Wine test.
Yeah.
They want to know why you chose that this was a Chilean cab or something. Okay. So let's go with, well, that's kind of gross. Let's go with fever. You have a fever.
Okay.
So if you're going to have, and there's also a dosage requirement with this.
Okay.
Okay. You could have a Medoc, left bank Bordeaux. You could have a Burgundy, Pinot Noir from the southwest, southeast, or you could have a glass of dry champagne to help with your fever.
I like the idea of curing my sickness.
Yeah, there you go. So even you win no matter what, right?
Alcohol. It's funny.
You can tell your friends.
I joke with my boyfriend. When I ever have a cold, I'm like, I'm gonna take a shot of tequila because it's just gonna clear out all the senses. I like this idea.
Couldn't hurt,
right? Okay, so Medoc, Burgundy, and dry champagne. I think I'm gonna go with the champagne for a couple of reasons. One is there's something about bubbles that settles the stomach.
Okay.
And when I'm sick, I want bubbles.
Sure.
I think I don't know. I've never thought about it this
Okay,
way.
that's a good one. Well, I could have given you like flatulence, by the way.
Well, I appreciate
But I
the
appreciate
fever.
it. In there, too. But you're right. It was champagne.
Okay,
So you're part of the statistically 33% of people that get that right.
there you go.
And the reason, and this is what Dr. Murray says, apart from the medications recommended and prescribed by the doctor, a good wine will stimulate the patient's own biological defenses and thus a return to normal temperature. And he cites the phosphorus, which is eminently stimulating, and the sulfur in its sulfate of potassium form, which has a detoxifying character on the body. So you were right. That's excellent. So now you know.
Now I know.
Tequila's not the answer.
You gotta have a glass
But
of champagne
so what's the dose you think? How much champagne should you have? Let's say in a day.
to get the body temperature back to normal.
Right.
Well, I'm gonna have to say a glass and a half because that's a
Well, because
perfect
you're 250
can.
ml, right? Well, it's a whole bottle a day.
A whole bottle a day.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now I think. Do you drink champagne?
Yeah.
Because you have a brut here.
yeah.
My son-in-law, our engineer today, loves. I turned my daughter and my son-in-law into a very expensive hobby, and habit. But I can drink a fair amount of sparkling wine
Yeah.
in an evening without really. And I think most champagne makers would also subscribe to this
Yeah.
because they would.
Well, especially if you
They
start
want you
in
to
the
drink
morning.
more. It's $75 a bottle. They would.
Yeah.
It's been a great time having you here today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
I hope we have a chance to do it again when your next chapter, when we see things embed a little further and you experience more. We'll do it again and talk about where you've been.
That would be great.
And good luck the rest of the day, and particularly when you're hanging out with Dane,
Yeah.
as it is.
He's a tough one, I know.
I know. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Callum-Carey. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.